Alrighty, let's get started. How y'all doing today? Yi Yang is having dinner? Good for you, Yi Yang. I hope it is tasty. Hope everyone's doing well. Sorry for being a couple minutes late. I ran into some technical difficulties, but thankfully my racial bonus to tech support kicked in, and I was able to make my, technology check and fix it. So for those of you that are joining us during meals and stuff, welcome, bon appetit, etc. So welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Alo Kanoja. I'm a psychiatrist. Just a reminder, everything we discuss today on stream is intended to be for educational purposes only, and nothing is intended to be taken as medical advice. If y'all have a concern or question that is medical in nature, please go see a licensed professional. Thank you to everyone who supports the stream. We really appreciate all of the subs and donations and all that good stuff. We're putting it to good use. Couple of other things to keep y'all in mind of. Today's the last day for promotional pricing for Dr. K's Guide to Mental Health. So if y'all want, detailed information about meditation, depression, or anxiety, that's kind of where we package that stuff. It's also part of the reason that we talk a little bit less about it on stream, because I think a lot of the basic questions have been answered there. If you guys haven't checked out the guide, we also go into a lot of detail about things that we usually don't talk about on stream. So, for example, like as an actual mental health professional, like how do I think about treatment? So when do I think about using a medication? Like, is medication right for you? Like, what are the kinds of considerations that, we think about when it comes to medication? Can you get by with yoga or meditation? Do you need medication? Like all those kinds of more detailed things, more solution-focused things are all in the guide. There's also more like diagnostic stuff. So that's the kind of stuff that we can't really do on stream very easily, right? So there's going to be things like worksheets and diet plans and things like that, where you can sort of tailor it to yourself. So there's like different exercises and stuff that will help guide you. So the guide is intended to be a little bit, we've taken advantage of the fact that, as long as it isn't a stream, we can actually add other things to it that deliver a little bit more value. And that's sort of why we built it. What are we talking about today? What a great question. So the other thing is we've recognized that as our demographic here at Healthy Gamer has changed. So at the very beginning, we were maybe like 90 to 95%, young men predominantly. We're talking like average age was like 20 to 24. As we've grown, our demographic has changed quite a bit. So we're closer to probably like 30% women now, maybe even larger. Our age demographic has changed quite a bit. We have a lot of young parents or even older parents as part of our demographic now, or our audience. The average 50% of people are over the age of 34, so things are changing a little bit. As a result, what we're trying to do for y'all and the kinds of questions that we're getting are also changing. So we actually have a new career channel on Discord, and it seems that we're getting a lot of questions that are like work-oriented stuff. So we're going to be like talking about one of those today. So how do people get into situations where they feel like a slave at work? So how does that situation arise? We're going to be talking a little bit about, conditions at work and things like that. So we're going to be doing some of that stuff. The other things that we're going to be talking about, so we're going to touch on a potentially, touchy topic today. And so there was a post on our subreddit a few days ago about someone who was concerned that they may be a pedophile. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and we're going to approach that in the same way that we do with everything else here at HG, which is to be scientific, and to try to be like, close to the truth, to not politicize or moralize or things like that. And so, because as you'll discover, so we'll talk a little bit about sort of the science of it, what we understand from a psychiatric, psychological perspective, things like that. And if y'all have concerns about that, if you think that that's not a good topic for us to like discuss or, understand, our approach at Healthy Gamer has always been to try to like understand things, right? So like if you want to change something about your life, like we have to start by understanding it. As y'all will learn, you'll be surprised at how common this is. And I think one of the reasons that we are interested in talking about it is because very, very few people do, despite the fact that it is like a shockingly common experience that people have. So we're going to try to help those people understand themselves, which is what we do for everyone in this community. And so we try, our focus, we've had people on stream who have been in jail for 20 years for committing murder. We've had people who are addicted to video games, people who are addicted to pornography, people who are addicted to all kinds of stuff, people who are struggling with depression, people who are very successful streamers who have their own struggles. We've had all kinds of people on stream. And so one of the things that we kind of think, or we've tackled all kinds of topics on stream. And so, I think that it's worthwhile to explore this because I do think it's an important issue. So, and then we'll touch on a couple of other Reddit posts if we have time. Okay. As always, we really appreciate your feedback here at Healthy Gamer, and people have, given all kinds of excellent feedback, and that's stuff that we're really taking into consideration in a very serious way. So if y'all have concerns about us talking about this topic or the way that we talk about it, please let us know. We're really here to help. And if people feel like we're doing more harm than good, which in the past we've had a couple of, topics recently that I think rubbed people the wrong way, which is, I think it's okay that we did that. Not saying that necessarily that we're going to do it again, but, I think it's important to hear feedback from the community because that's how we learn how to be good, right? Is we have to try things, and then if y'all are happy with it and it's helpful to you, please let us know. And if you're unhappy with it and you feel it's harmful, please let us know. Who is the we at Healthy Gamer? Mainly you and your wife? No. Dude, we're like a team of I think 16, 18 people now. That doesn't even include the coaches. So the coaches are a huge part of this too. So, okay. So let's go ahead and start. So what do you guys so I'm going to share with y'all a couple of options. Or not options, let's kind of dive in, okay? So let's start with work-related stuff. So let's think about this. So Prague Snob SC says that the coaching platform has helped you immensely. I'm really, really happy that you had a good experience. Someone else, how difficult is it to get a coach? Anybody have experience? So I think our coaching program tends to run at close to 100% capacity. I think a lot of people get good value out of it. And so we're working on that too. So we're actually training more coaches right now. So for people who are asking, can I do software work for Healthy Gamer? We have an awesome team of developers. Love them a lot. They're mega cool and gamers, and they're part of our community, so I love that. You guys can always check out our careers page and see what we're looking for. So someone's asking, would coaching work for someone with BPD? I feel like that might be too much for a coach, but I'm interested in trying. So I'd say if you have a clinical diagnosis and you're interested in clinical treatment, you should go see a clinician. So let's just understand this very quickly. And we'll get to this maybe in one or two of the posts we're going to talk about today. So as a clinician, the main thing that you're trained in is dealing with pathology. So dealing with something like depression. But you're not really trained formally in helping people achieve their goals. You don't spend, I spent, let's say, 6 months learning about depression and working on a depression unit, working with people day in and day out with depression. Even if you look at psychologists and social workers and stuff, they'll in order to get, at least covered in the US for your services, you can't, if someone comes in and says, I want help finding a romantic partner, that may be an appropriate topic for therapy, but it's not actually what people get their training in, right? So you can absolutely go to a therapist for help with that, but it's just not what they're formally trained in. They're formally trained in things like diagnostic assessments, ADHD, autism, depression, anxiety, things like that. They're not really formally trained in helping people achieve their goals. So when I was training to become a psychiatrist, I sort of noticed that a lot of my yogic training and meditation training was the purpose of meditation is to take someone who's at baseline and help them achieve above baseline, right? So it's about finding health and happiness and contentment and peace and accomplishing your dharma. So like, making meaningful impact in the world. Like that's what spirituality essentially, that's the kind of spiritual training that I underwent. Whereas when I was training to become a psychiatrist, like it was not about, I never had a class about how do you help someone find meaning in the world? Like, how do you help someone achieve their goals? Like, there's no formal training in that. Sure, we talked about those things. So for example, like we learned some about Erik Erikson, who sort of categorized that each, age group has a central conflict that people have to like sort of work through to move on to the next thing. Like what's the process of development and maturation? So there's like kind of that kind of sort of theoretical stuff. But I'm not spending 6 months or 1 year helping people achieve their goals. That's not what clinical practice usually does. And so if you're really interested in treating your borderline personality disorder, I do not think that a coach is the right place to go. I mean, I say this having, we run a coaching program here, but I don't think that's what it's for. The coaching program is to help people achieve their goals, to help people understand themselves a little bit better, and potentially work on some things that are kind of tangential to mental health. So it is like mental health focus, I should say, tangential to mental illness. And we do see, for example, clinical improvements in depression and anxiety that are actually quite large, but we're not actually treating it. This is, in my experience as a psychiatrist, what I've seen is that like once you start to have a life that is worth living, your depression and anxiety get better on their own, right? So there's like, even without directly treating it, if you think about, the amount of depression you experience, let's say like there's 100% depression, right? So what percentage of that is a clinical like contribution? Like maybe 60%. And then 30 to 40% may actually be like life-related stuff. So if I'm depressed and I'm alone and I have no friends and I'm, not in a romantic relationship, the clinical depression may be a piece of it, but like not having friends and not being in a romantic relationship and feeling lonely are not like clinical pathologies, right? There are actual circumstances in my life which are going to contribute very naturally to my depression. So that is not a pathology. It's not like a, wow, I may have to fix that. Hold on a second. So that's not a pathology. That's just, nope, not that one. Let's try that. Okay, hopefully that'll fix it. Yeah, it's because there's clouds and stuff. I have natural lighting in here. Anyway, so it's not a pathology. There can actually be circumstances in your life that can make you more worried, make you feel pessimistic about the future. And coaching is really designed to help you understand yourself and then like move towards goals in sort of a structured and focused way. Whereas therapy is really designed to treat clinical illness, which is why it's a therapy, right? So it's to fix a pathology. It's to help you move from a negative to a baseline. And coaching is really sort of like designed for like that middle window of kind of like maybe -20 to like +50. And then you're really going to need like hardcore spirituality to go from like 50 to 100, in my opinion. So that's kind of what it's for. So do these getting better correlations also happen within coachees with ADHD? We don't know. I wish we had the answer to that. So we may start measuring that kind of stuff. So we've got a lot of stuff, like we've got a big research division, which, by the way, so like donations and stuff, for example, like generally speaking, don't go to like pay my salary or things like that. They actually go to fund our research projects, which, we will hope to publish and things like that for the benefit of our community. So like that kind of stuff, we're doing a lot in terms of research. Do you still have to be a gamer? Not at all. So I would say that even the majority of people in our coaching program are not gamers. Or maybe they are, maybe they play video games. I don't know that their central like thing is that they're a gamer. So someone's saying that I have ADHD and I'm in coaching, but I'm only one person, so my experience isn't indicative. Okay. Like academic research? Absolutely. Do coaches usually do gaming? Depends on the coach. Anyway, let's hop into stuff. What do y'all think? Okay, let's go. I see there's lots of questions, so we'll try to manage those later. Okay. So, hello everyone. I'm basically a modern slave. I wanted to tell you guys a little bit about my current work situation. I'm working as a pizza delivery driver. I work 13 to 15 hours a day, 4 to 5 days per week, making approximately $3.60, that's euro, right? Per hour plus tips. Then they were, when they were hiring, they said I'll need to work 11-hour shifts plus taking coworkers home after work. Apparently, those few hours cleaning pizza place after the shift, driving my coworkers home is not paid. This week, I worked for 6 days per week. The boss called me, in other words, begging me to help them by working, but only this week because 2 other people left after the new year and 1 got COVID. I asked if I have a choice. The boss said basically no. I agreed because I thought it's only that 1 week. Today, I find out that next week I'm working 6 days as well. That made me quite furious. This last week, I feel like I'm not even living life. I wake up, go to work, get absolutely tired, get back home, sleep, because at that moment you don't want to do anything else, and repeat. I just want to quit so bad. Anyways, just needed a place to vent. I thought about quitting tomorrow. My shift starts in 5 minutes. It's going to be a long day. Stay strong, folks, and I'll try to do the same. Okay. So the first thing is that I'm noticing that a lot of people in chat are kind of saying like, this has to be this location. Oh, this sounds like Portugal. This sounds like France. This sounds like this part. And I think the truth is that this is happening everywhere, right? So what I'd like to talk to y'all about today is like, how do people become modern slaves, right? So what are the circumstances that lead to this kind of situation where, they're hired under these conditions and even told at the very beginning that like it's going to be 11-hour shifts and they're going to have to take home coworkers. In some ways, this is even like better than usual because a lot of times during the hiring process, people will say one thing and then they'll force you to do something else. And it's really tough because in these situations, we may look at this and people on the internet will say, just quit, just go find another job. Right? But the truth is that if you're in this situation of modern slavery, it's not that simple. There's a reason why you wound up here in the first place. And it's not like that this person is like foolish or anything like that. It's not that this person is lazy or foolish or, doesn't know any better or things like that. There are very real circumstances, both externally and internally, that lead people into this situation. And until we have an appreciation for like how someone gets here and what goes into this situation, then only can we start to really come up with solutions to help people get out of the situation. And so what I'm going to talk a little bit about today is like, modern slavery and how do people get into this situation? And more importantly, like what are the key dynamics at play? So for example, what are the power dynamics at play? What kind of like modeling has this person had early in their life? How do they determine what is acceptable or unacceptable? And then other kinds of stuff as well. So, some of this stuff is like, for example, this person is saying those few hours are not paid. And it's like, a lot of people will be like, wait, what? Like, then why are you doing it? How is that legal? That can't be legal. It may not be legal. The other thing is that, we see other things that happen a lot in working situations. The boss called me begging me to help them work, right? So when a boss begs you, what is going on psychologically when begging is happening? The next thing that happens is I asked if I have a choice and the boss said, basically no. Does basically no mean no? Or is it almost no? So if something is almost no or basically no, what does that actually mean, right? So this is the kind of thing where like oftentimes in work situations, because of power dynamics and boundary setting issues, people will use certain kinds of language and then like we won't really clarify what that means. And then what we end up doing, because like I want y'all to understand this for a second. When you ask if you have a choice and your boss says basically no, in their mind, are they thinking that you have a choice? Actually, kind of yes, right? Because they sort of like, you're asking if you have a choice and they're like, oh, they agreed to it. So a boss can walk out of this interaction believing that the worker agreed to this, right? So this is the kind of thing that, like, there's a lot actually going on here that we can learn from about setting healthy boundaries, especially in power dynamic situations. And that is like really, really important. The last thing is, today I found out I'm working 6 days as well, right? So like in this situation, do you have the power to say no? And then the last thing is, that made me quite furious. So when you're at work and you feel something, right? So when your boss is begging me, what do you feel? And when you start to feel quite furious, you feel a certain way, like what do you do with those feelings, right? How do those feelings interact with your boss? How do they interact with your work environment? Essentially, what are the emotional drives that happen within us that create situations like this? And in my overwhelming experience, understanding the emotional drives and understanding the power dynamics and how to set healthy boundaries has been very, very helpful to people to like create like good work environments. And this is the kind of thing where when I say create good and work environments, I don't mean just for the employee. So this might sound kind of weird because I know at least the anti-work subreddit is like very like anti-employer. But like, I want y'all to think about this work situation. Like, do you think the employer is happy here? They've had 2 people quit. They've had 1 person get sick with COVID, maybe because they've had COVID policies that aren't really great, right? And then like this person is on the verge of quitting. Like, this is not a good place even from an employer's perspective. So some people may think a lot about, okay, like, this is a predatory workplace, and it absolutely is. But people sort of assume that a predatory workplace is good for the employer, which in my overwhelming experience is not the case. And so this is where understanding some of these things, because like this person, this employer is basically, by virtue of crapping on their employees so much, driving their employees away and like pushing themselves out of business. Like, that's what they're doing. And so the interesting thing is that acknowledging healthy boundaries and sort of like acknowledging emotions at work, being very clear about communication and not taking advantage of your employees is actually good for the employer too. There's sort of this idea that like, work, like that if you're a predatory employer, that you're winning, when in my experience, overwhelmingly, and I've done consulting at a lot of different companies, the companies that do the best are the ones that have happy employees and like respectful employers. Like, when there's respect on both sides, when there's fairness on both sides, that's actually when things end up the best. I know it's crazy. So let's kind of dive into this, okay? So let's talk about modern slavery. And we're going to just touch on, I'm just putting some of this stuff here on the side. So here's some considerations, right? So here's the scenario. So this person is working a lot. 2 people have quit recently. They're being asked to do extra work. Their employer is begging them, right? But are they getting a raise? Like, no. Uh-oh. Are we lagging? GG. Hold on a second. This is going to be a problem if we're lagging. This is the technical problem I was having earlier. It's going to be hard to do without diagrams, chat. We can try. Come on, you can do it, network. You can do it. You can do it. Nope. GG. I don't understand this, man. Like, literally, it's the same setup, same Wi-Fi. Everything is plugged in the same. And some days, like, nope. GG. Okay. I don't know exactly what to do. So we're just going to try to, like, do this the old-fashioned way, I suppose. Okay. Maybe we'll use a Word doc. Let me think about this. Let's try one more thing. All right, chat, last chance. Otherwise, it's Word doc or just... Come on, you can do it. There we go. Okay. Okay, still kind of laggy, but we'll make it work. Okay. All right. So we're talking about modern slavery and how do we get to this point? Okay. So I think that generally speaking, oh no. blah. Nope. Not seeing it. Okay. All right, so we're just going sans diagram. Oh, no, there it is. Okay, blah, blah. Okay, maybe we'll get a little bit of lag, but I'm just going to keep going. And let's see what happens, okay? Okay, so it seems to be working okay now. Okay. So, I wonder if there's some kind of electrical device causing interference, but okay. So let's talk a little bit about modern slavery and how we get here. So I'd say that the biggest thing that leads to modern slavery is unhealthy boundaries. So a lot of times at work, we'll have these situations where bosses will beg us, right? They'll like ask us for favors. And so there'll be so this job, for example, has unhealthy boundaries at the get-go. So like, for example, if you were to ask this person, when do you start work? And then the person will say, like, I start work at this time. And when does work end? Well, work sort of ends like when I'm done with my shift, but then I have to clean after and I have to drop people off. Oh, okay, so is that like a part of your job? And they're like, well, sort of. Do you get paid for it? Well, not really. Then is it a part? I'm confused. Is this like a favor? Is it part of your job? Like, what is that extra uncompensated time? So work, starts here and goes here, and you get compensated here, or euro, right? Did I do the euro symbol right, or is that backwards? It's lagging, whatever. And then there's like this extra time over here, which is like uncompensated. So is that a part of your job, or is that not a part of your job? So in the United States, if you require someone to do something, generally speaking, you have to pay them for it. There are some exceptions to that, but generally speaking, that's kind of the case. And so, this is lagging again. Okay, whatever. So if that's the case, then what is this? Is this part of your job, or is this not part of your job? So the first thing that we kind of realize from this scenario is that they're unhealthy boundaries. So if you're in a situation where it's like a little bit unclear what's a part of your job or what isn't a part of your job, like that's the start of unhealthy boundaries. So what tends to happen if you have unhealthy boundaries is this results in something called job creep, right? So we see this like especially in programming and stuff where there's like scope creep, where if you've got like a project and then like then someone else wants this feature and then you want this feature, and then suddenly like the project that was this big over time becomes this big, and then over time becomes this big, but early on, like you were budgeted for this. And then people get confused when they ask for this, and then they ask for this, and then you end up paying more euro. And then like they're super confused. They're like, but this was the budget that you gave me. So we see this a lot in terms of like when you have developers working with like executives, right? They're like, you see this a lot even in the gaming industry, where it's like, we want to have customized armor. And it's like, that's going to cost you something, right? And then we end up with all kinds of problems like games being released too early and things like that. So in the same way, in a job, oftentimes what we'll see is that there's going to be some kind of like boundary that is unhealthy or muddy in some way. And then like, as that boundary is nice and loose, like unhealthy employers will cause you to like, they'll cram stuff into there, right? So the biggest example that we see, which we definitely saw today, was, where is this? So like, because 2 people left after the new year and 1 got COVID, so like what's happening to this work? So there used to be 3 additional people at work. And like, where is that work going? It's going into this person, right? So the person who stays is the one who's like getting all that work. And so what tends to happen with employers actually is like, this is a common thing that I see, is that if you have loose boundaries, if there are 2 people at work, one of them has loose boundaries and one of them has firm boundaries, the one with the loose boundaries is the one that keeps on getting more work. Right? You're going to keep on getting more and more work packed into your unhealthy boundary because you're the person like at the very beginning. And we see this with this person. So the person, even when they got hired, did not set a firm boundary where like they were told like at the beginning of work that, hey, you're going to have to do a bunch of work that we're not going to pay you for. And the person was like, okay. And so in doing so, they've established a fluid boundary. Right? And once they've established a fluid boundary, then we're like, it's kind of like open season. Like, oh, people quit? Yeah, you're going to need to do this. And then what's going to happen is employers, and this isn't just employers, this is humans. Okay, so employees will do this with employers as well, by the way. So it's not like one way. So then what's going to happen is, by the way, you got to pick people up. Right? So these are bad working conditions. And then we have like these two people over here who have firm boundaries and they quit. Right? Because they were like, this is ridiculous. I'm not getting paid for this. Then you have the one person that stays. So they stay. And then this work goes over here, and then suddenly this person is working 6 days a week because of begging, and we'll get to that in a second. And then just this week. But what do we know about this person's boundaries? What are they going to do if we push them? They're going to be like, okay. And then into next week. And then they're going to experience frustration. Right? But what do they do with their frustration? They post on the internet. They don't go have a conversation with their boss or their employer and say, hey, this is ridiculous. I'm on the verge of quitting. And then what's going to happen is they're going to get fed up. And then they're going to quit. And you may say, like, so the anti-work subreddit, I think, is going to be like cheering if this person quits, right? They're going to be like, yay, like this person quit, like screw capitalism, stick it to the man, which is totally fine. I mean, I have nothing against, quitting and leaving a unfair employer to figure out their own mess. But I'm concerned about this person because what do you think is going to happen the next time they get a job, right? Are all these boundary issues magically going to be fixed? I don't think so, right? Next time what's going to happen is maybe they'll find another job where someone's like going to start off, because y'all see that like this scenario is actually designed to like not end well. And it's all because of unhealthy boundaries. So then the question is like, what's going on here and what contributes to this? So we start with unhealthy boundaries. And what are like, how do we like, where does this come from? There are a couple of other things here. So one is there's conflict avoidance. This is a huge thing. So if we want to understand how to correct this behavior, we have to understand conflict avoidance. So this person had multiple options to like set a boundary, right? So why don't we set good boundaries? That's kind of the next point. Like, okay, Dr. K, you're saying set good boundaries. Why don't we? Because we're conflict avoidant. So at the job interview, when they're told from the get-go, by the way, you're going to need to work 11-hour days and you have to drop people off. And then like, what do you say at that point, right? Like, why don't you say anything? You're like, oh, okay. And then you ask these questions like, do I have a choice? And then the person says basically no. And then it's like, what's going on there? That's all conflict avoidance. So this person has never said to their boss, I don't think that this is fair, right? They've never set a boundary. They've said, I'm happy to work. I'm happy to do whatever you want to, but if this is a job, I expect to be compensated. Like, I'm confused. Are you asking me to volunteer my time? Or is this like paid work? Does this need to be done? And if you're hiring me, like, why is it my responsibility to arrange for transport? I'm confused. I thought my job was to make pizza. So is this a part of my job description or is this not a part of my job description? Now, I'm not saying that like you shouldn't, and this is one of the worst things that I think has happened, is that employers have taken the aspect of team player and abused it so much that it like terrifies me as someone who has both worked in good team player environments and now like as someone who employs people. Like, so we love team players, but somewhere along the way, team player started to mean like, we're going to ask you to do a bunch of work and we're not going to compensate you for it. Like, that's not what a team player is. Like, I don't know if y'all have ever done this, but I've worked in environments where people are team players and those are awesome environments. Like, what does a team player mean? I still remember to this day, in the summer of 2014, I was in residency for 2 months. And I was just so overwhelmed and so overworked. And my like colleagues right next to me were equally overwhelmed and equally overworked. And the doctor that was sitting next to me, also in residency for 2 months, we've been doing it just as long. I have to do something called a prior authorization, which is I have to make a phone call to an insurance company to try to get them to pay for a medication that one of my patients needs. And usually this is like a 30-minute like process where you sit on hold for like 20 minutes. I was just exhausted. And the doctor next to me turns to me and says, do you want me to take care of that prior auth for you? And I was like, dude, you have too much to do. Like, I can't ask you to do this. And like, seriously, don't worry about it. Like, I'll take care of it for you. And she took care of it for me. And it was like the nicest thing in the world. Like even now, 7 years later, I remember that moment because like, it's not like she had a less work than I did. We both had a ton of work. We're both overworked, but she was a team player in that moment. And so to this day, I've tried my best to repay her, but I don't think I've never repaid that debt despite my best efforts. So you can absolutely like be a team player. Like I think being a team player is good. Like the whole point of a corporation, at least in my mind, I mean, maybe it's profit and stuff like that, but you know, I think the point is that like, if you guys have ever worked in environments where you're just all by yourself, like that's not fun. It's not engaging. The whole point, if we think about like AoE healing in this community, the whole point is that we can do stuff together that we can't do on our own. But what's happened in the capitalistic corporate world is team player has been hijacked, culturally appropriated to be like a veil over abusive work practices. And that's ridiculous. So now like people are like, oh, we don't want team players. It's like, I don't want to work in any environment where there are team players. Like, what do you want? You want to work in a cubicle where you're like a peon, like sitting at a computer doing like, that's terrible. Right? So I'm not blaming those people for avoiding the term team player. What I'm blaming is that companies are like starting to use team player as, you know, some license to be predatory and put people into like a slavery-like situation. That's ridiculous. But we want to work in teams. Like, that's fun. Like, it's good to be a team player. Anyway, so if we kind of look at this, what we see here is a thread of conflict avoidance. And if we want to understand, you know, why are we conflict avoidant? Then what happens is we need to look at emotional drivers. So this in turn results in emotional drivers. Or not results in, is due to emotional drivers. So if we kind of look at this post, we see a lot of emotions threaded out through here, right? So like when they were hiring, they said, I'll need to work 11-hour shifts plus taking coworkers home after work. Apparently, those few hours is not paid. So like, what do you imagine this person was feeling in that moment? What do you think that was going through their head? And then now it's like when their boss calls and begs them, like they're begging and forcing. This is really confusing. So the boss called me, in other words, begging me to help them because 2 people left. I asked if I have a choice and the boss said no. So what's happening here? Is the boss forcing them or begging them? Because in one situation, the power dynamic is that if I'm begging you, you have all the power. In the other situation, if I'm forcing you, you have none of the power. So there's weird power dynamics crap going on. There's weird emotional drivers going on. And then you feel furious. And what do you do with that fury? Do you talk to your boss about it? No. You just either take it, you just keep taking it, right? Or what you do is you just like reach your limit and you quit, which is what this person has managed to like, this is the work environment they managed to create. They've not created a work environment where people feel comfortable coming to their boss and sharing with them like what their concerns are, which is crucial. It's critical, right? So all of the good environments that I've worked in have systems of feedback where like people can go to the, you know, their superiors and they can say, hey, I'm unhappy with this. And it's not like the superior listens to you 100%. They're not going to like make changes. Like, for example, you know, residents in the United States are like criminally underpaid, but we have no negotiating power. And even my boss doesn't really have much negotiating power there because they have to answer to like a whole like systemic industry of predatory work and for medical residents, but that's neither here nor there. So, right. So like, that's not my boss's fault. Like they're going to advocate and do what they can. And they're like, they honestly are trying to make things better. They're happy to work there. They want to be a team player. They want to support us. We want to support them. And it's awesome. Like I still, to this day, literally this morning, I texted my former boss because they're an awesome person and I have like really good relationship with them. And so what are these emotional drivers? Okay, so let's like start to look at a couple of common emotional drivers. So I'll give you guys an example of how emotional drivers result in poor boundaries. Okay, so let's use an example first. So let's say I'm afraid of loneliness. And then I start hanging out with some friends. And then one of them makes fun of me. What do I do? Right? I'm afraid of loneliness. What do I do? What do y'all think? You laugh it off, right? Ha 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 ha. You're so funny when you call me an idiot. Ha 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 ha. Ignore it, right? So then what kind of behavior does that reinforce? So then someone else, a different friend number 2, makes fun of you the next day. Right? And then what do you do? Well, kind of weird, right? And then you kind of ha 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 ha. Laugh it off. Lols. Yeah, you're right. I'm so insignificant of a human being. Ha 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 ha. And now since you're afraid of loneliness, you kind of tolerate this behavior, and then the group sort of learns. They're like, oh, cool. So this person is the butt of the jokes. Great. We needed someone to beat up on when we're feeling bad about ourselves. Fantastic. And so you become the butt of the jokes. And now you know you're the butt of the jokes. It's become a thing. The whole group is this is the person, and it starts off as oh, wow, person is awesome. They can take a joke. But over time, it grows and they push that boundary and they start making fun of you. And then you end up in these situations where your friends actually actively bully you. But then why do you stay? Because you're afraid of loneliness. Because if I tell them, hey, that's not funny, this person will dislike me. If they dislike me, they will not invite me to their house. If they don't invite me to their house and they invite all of my other friends, I will be alone. So it's I have a choice. Either I can hang out with these people, have some fun, and be the butt of the jokes, or I can be a loser. I can be a loser at home on my own, or I can be a loser with them, but still have friends and not be as much of a loser. Right? So this is just an example of how an emotional drive actually leads to unhealthy boundaries. So does this happen at work? And absolutely, right? So let's think about a couple of different things that happen. So people are reluctant to ask for stuff. Why are we reluctant to ask for stuff? Because we don't want to be perceived as greedy. Right? So who's greedy? The corporation or the employee? We don't want to be like them. We demonize greed. Even right now within the anti-work subreddit, we are demonizing greed. And what are we doing by demonizing greed? We're saying, oh, these corporations are so evil and greedy. And in a bizarre way, we're actually we're labeling this thing as greedy, which I'm with. But then what's going to happen is subconsciously, we're actually at the same time making employees feel greedy for doing things like asking for raises or just compensation or things like that. So this is a huge thing. I don't want my boss to think I'm greedy. Okay? Huge emotional driver. So emotional driver number 1. Emotional driver number 2. So when it comes to time for promotion and things like that, people have difficulty advocating for themselves in a work environment, right? So they have difficulty advocating for what they're worth. And why is that? It's because I don't want to be perceived as a show-off. Right? So if you crush, let's say you've got some kind of contract and you do a really good job, and then you don't want to be perceived as a show-off, so you don't really advocate for yourself. You don't really let your boss know. You don't let other people know. Because there's someone else at work who's always talking about how awesome they are, and you don't want to be like that person. So you don't want to be perceived as a show-off. So you don't share your accomplishments. Right? And then what happens? Then your colleague gets promoted. And then what do? You mauled. Right? And then you start talking about how biased and evil your boss is. Oh my God, they're so biased. See this all the time. Which may be true, right? So we're not saying, and this is the problem with echo chambers on the internet, is that someone will post this, but no one will ever say, do you advocate for yourself? Right? I'm not saying that these predatory workplaces don't exist. I'm not saying that these employers are behaving properly. But what I'm saying is that in this scenario, and what we tend to focus on is you. So what are the emotional drivers at play that force you into situations that are unhealthy for you and actually happen to be unhealthy for the employer, generally speaking, I believe. Maybe I'm wrong there. I'm not an expert in business. Okay? So you don't want to be perceived as a show-off. Now, there's other kinds of weird things as well, right? So, like, you get guilt tripped. So, like, you want to be a team player. Like, and so this is where the guilt tripping comes in. This isn't just employers, right? This is like, you have to be careful about the emotional driver of not feeling like an asshole. Because that's a really powerful driver, because you don't think of yourself as the asshole, right? The boss is the asshole. The corporation is the asshole. I'm not the asshole. Therefore, if your boss comes to you and begs you, and by the way, we see this 1-2 punch all the way and all the time in unhealthy environments, that 1-2 punch is guilt plus forcing. And it's not just unhealthy work environments, it's also like abusive relationships. So if you have like a narcissistic parent or family member or things like that, they will both force you and guilt you like at the same time. So I've seen parents that will do things like guilt their kid into coming home for the holidays. And then like there's the carrot, it's not even the carrot. It's like one kind of stick and another kind of stick. And by the way, if you don't come home for the holidays, I'm not going to pay for your college anymore. Asshole. And then you're like, and I'm so lonely. Like I've done so much for you. I'm paying for your college. And if you're not going to like come home for the holidays, like I can't believe I do so much for you. Like I can't believe that you wouldn't even come home. Like, don't you realize how like alone I am? Like I've done everything for you. I've sacrificed for you. And how dare you try to have a life outside of me? And by the way, if you're not going to like, you know, sacrifice for me, like if your friends are more important to you than I am, then maybe I have other things that are more important to me than you are. Right? It's like there's this weird 1-2 punch of begging you to take these extra shifts and forcing you to do so. So watch out for the emotional driver of guilt trip, right? And like you're not being an asshole by setting a limit to someone. It certainly feels that way. But be aware of that emotional driver. Okay? Next thing. So, the hidden tracking, I don't know what to call this, of raise versus fire. So internally, we have this weird little complex that is always trying to figure out, are we going to get raise? Are we going to get a raise? Are we going to get promoted? Or are we going to get fired? Because no one ever like keeps score, right? Like the score is not kept really above board. Like you don't know when you have strikes. You don't know when you have check marks. So let's say that, you know, there's 3 check marks. In order to get a raise, we need 3 check marks, right? And then in order to get fire, we need 3 X's. But no one ever tells you like which of these you have and which of these you don't have. So there's just this guessing game going on. So this is all like behind, you know, you can't see what's going on here. So a lot of times in these particular situations, like if we go back to this example where the person is saying, they're told in the interview, by the way, you have to work 11-hour days and there's a bunch of unpaid work after that you have to do. What this person is thinking is this is like a subtle test, right? There's a check mark at play. Like if I set a boundary or even ask a question, this person is going to think, oh my God, I'm not a team player. And then I will be one step closer to not being hired or being fired or not getting promoted, right? Because we all want approval. And then similarly for each of these different things that this person is being asked to do, drive people home, you know, come in 6 days a week, what they're thinking in their mind is like, is this going to move me towards promotion? And what's really devastating for people is that they will do all kinds of stuff gunning for promotion. Right? But since it's all opaque, they actually don't know. They're like, I'm going to make this sacrifice 1, and then sacrifice 2, and then sacrifice 3. But like, since I don't want to be perceived as a show off, I'm sort of quietly making these sacrifices and not really like advertising it because I don't want to seem greedy. And then when promotion time comes around, someone else gets promoted, and then you feel resentful. Or frustrated. And this is where the journey ends. So now what do you do with this resentment or frustration? You tend to quit. Or swallow it and keep going. What people don't do is like share some kind of feedback with their boss, right? We don't go up to our boss and we don't say, hey, by the way, I've been working really hard and I've been actually going the extra mile and being a team player. And I'm like, I don't understand why this person was promoted, because based on my experience, I actually work way more than they do. Right? So we don't say things like that. We don't air things out to our boss. Now, that doesn't mean that maybe that person is doing all kinds of stuff so that you're not aware of. That is the reason that they got promoted. But I think it's completely reasonable to share that kind of stuff with your boss. The key thing here, though, is that, until you start acknowledging these emotional drivers that drive these unhealthy boundaries and put you in situations that are predatory, this kind of thing is going to keep happening. You can keep job hunting, and should you quit this kind of job? Like, absolutely, right? So I think you should quit and try to go find another job by all means. But be careful, because the next time around, when you're in one of these jobs and someone tries to push a boundary, like, it's okay to do things outside of your role. Like, even now, today, I do things that are outside of my role. We have, that's actually pretty normal for, a pretty healthy, functioning workplace. But over time, what you want is, some amount of compensation for that, acknowledgement of that, or, how we do things at HG is, someone does something outside of their role, and then they do it for a while, and they're like, this is actually really frustrating. We're like, okay, so it sounds like we really need to hire a person to take that off of your plate so that you can focus on your job. That's how it should go at a company, right? And so this kind of thing is happening all the time. And if we don't want to fall into this trap of modern slavery, it really comes with setting healthy boundaries. Setting healthy boundaries, in turn, has to do with understanding why we don't set healthy boundaries. So there may be some degree of power dynamics at play, but a big part of it tends to be conflict avoidance. And especially the conflict avoidance that you're concerned about has to do with emotional drivers. And those being, wanting to be perceived as a certain way. You don't want to be perceived as greedy. You don't want to be a show-off. You want to be a team player. You don't want to, feel guilty, right? So the avoidance of that feeling of guilt results in you making a sacrifice. And if you're in an unhealthy work environment, your employer is not going to recognize that and not acknowledge it, or, won't promote you or something. I mean, hopefully at least there's an acknowledgement of some kind. And sometimes the acknowledgement is ridiculous. So I remember hearing during the pandemic, some CEO of a hospital system got a $16 million bonus, and all of the residents in that same hospital system got a thank you cap. They got a hat. And it's one guy's making $16 million, and the residents who are on the front lines taking care of patients are getting caps. This is ridiculous, right? So, and then a couple of other things to keep in mind are that in your mind, be aware of what, if you're keeping this hidden tracker of, am I on track for a promotion or am I on track to get fired? And how much does that fear of not getting promoted or striving to be promoted or, not getting fired, how much does that influence whether you let other people cross your boundaries? And then lastly, as you start to build up negative emotions from the result of numbers 1 through 4, you're going to end up with resentment and frustration. How do you manage that resentment and frustration? Do you just let it build up and quit? Do you offer feedback to your boss and say, hey, this is not really working for me, or I'm very unhappy here? What do you think is going to happen? Or do you swallow it and keep going? Because generally speaking, the two things that people do is this and this, whereas what they should be doing is have a conversation. This is where you may say, but if I have a conversation, nothing is going to change. And that's where, now hold on a second. I think you got to be careful there, because it's possible that nothing may change. You may be at a work environment where people are completely unresponsive to your feedback and they don't care what you think. And in that case, you should absolutely quit. And people may say, okay, if I quit, how do I find a different job? This is what you say when you go into your next job. Y'all ready for it? You guys want to get a good job out of this situation? How do you turn this situation into a good job? Here it is. Hi, my name is Mad for Money. I'm a dedicated hard worker and I'm a team player. Why did I leave my last job? So I started out working 11-hour days, and then I found out that, people needed transport to and from work. So I actually went ahead and did that. And then a couple people quit, and my boss asked me to lift more, and I was actually happy to do that. So for 1 week, I started working 6 days a week, 11-hour shifts. I'm a dedicated worker. I'm a team player. And the boss started making that regular, and I wasn't comfortable with that. So I'm happy to be a team player. I'm happy to be a hard worker. I'm happy to go the extra mile. But I'm looking for a place that will reward that kind of behavior instead of take advantage of it. And that's why I left my last employer. And then you can ask them, set boundaries then and there. How do you treat employees who go the extra mile? Do they get compensated more? Do they get promoted more? Do they get raises? Or do they get treated the same? You can ask them. And then, like, this is an interview, right? It's not just one way. Because when you come into that office, like, that, you are an employee that people want, right? Like, you are someone that they want. Like, you want someone who's going to go the extra mile. And so you're interviewing them too. And so you can say, like, if I go the extra mile, like, how have you rewarded employees in the past? And this is when the employer starts shitting themselves. Because if they haven't done that, they're, well, like, we've done this and this. Okay. Right? But I can guarantee you this, like, I guess I can't guarantee it, but they're not going to walk out of that interview thinking you're underqualified and a pushover. Does that make sense? Like, they may think you're an asshole. They may think you're hard to work with. But you've demonstrated that you can say, like, look, I'm a hard worker. I just want to be fairly compensated. Like, that's all. You know, and I'm happy to go the extra mile, but, like, I expect, you know, like, I don't want to be in a place where people are going to take advantage of that. I want to be in a place where people reward that kind of behavior. So that's like, you have to be careful about your phrasing, right? So you don't want to, like, go too far down the every extra minute that I work, I want 1 cent extra. So that kind of thing, I don't think is generally speaking what employers want. But absolutely sort of pointing out that you're someone who's looking to be, like, rewarded for going the extra mile is, like, fantastic. Right? So, yeah, and this is where people are, like, kind of commenting, oh, like, no one wants to work. Like, no, people actually want to work. Do you guys get that? This is the biggest problem right now, is that people are, like, getting confused. Employers are getting confused. People want to work. People want to do things with meaning. Right? They, like, want to be productive. Like, humans like being productive. They just don't want to be taken advantage of for working. That's all. Right? There's not a labor shortage. There's a wage shortage. Like, you're getting €3.6 euro per hour of work plus tips, and you're doing all this extra work. And, like, this is what's going to happen. You're going to burn through all of your good employees if you're an employer like that. And there are good places to work. Like, those places exist. Last time I checked, actually, Google was one of those places. You know, you don't hear, like, here's, like, the two opposite ends of the spectrum, right? Some places you have, like, this where people are working a lot. Google's like, we're going to keep our office open 24 hours a day. You can commute if you want to. You cannot come if you don't want to. By the way, we want you in the office because we've noticed that, like, maybe it's good if you're in the office. So we're going to give you a bunch of free good food. There's going to be a chef that you can, you know, they'll fix you what you want. Here's our menu. Like, we're going to try to make your work. There's a gym here. So we want you to, like, take care of yourself. And we're actually willing to put our money where our mouth is. So instead of saying, yeah, like, we're a company that values employee wellness, right? Google's like, we'll give you a gym and a chef. You know, it's so, you know, I think that this is the kind of situation where, like, I think this is good. Like, I think it's healthy because all these sort of basically unsustainable, non-survival of the fittest kind of, like, employers are going to go bust. Right? And, like, they're not entitled to exist. Like, if we're talking about a free market system, like, employers that can't con enough people are so bad at conning people into jobs, like, and people start quitting, like, they should quit. You know? Okay. Let's move on. So, next up, we've got... Okay. All right. So this is... We're going to take a break for a second. Oh, man, I hope we have time for at least... Oh, my God, we've got 3 more. Okay. Okay, so next up. I think I'm a pedophile. So the first thing that I want to point out that I'm kind of proud of is that, like, so this person posted this on our subreddit. And, you know, I think that pedophiles are in a tricky situation because they don't really find any kind of support or acceptance anywhere, which may be reasonable for some reasons. But I think it's really great that this was not downvoted into oblivion, right? Because we're a community and we're dedicated to helping people understand themselves and improve themselves. And especially with the tone that this person took, I think that I'm really happy that our community tried to actually support this person's growth and self-reflection. So this is kind of hitting me all at once, and I'm feeling very alone right now. I've struggled with these feelings for a long time, and I don't really know what to do about it. My mother was molested when she was a kid, and she never got any therapy or anything. I think this had an effect on my family because sex was always weird in my family. My mom would grab my butt a lot when I was little and made an extra emphasis about it. I was always confused about it and never understood why she did that. It gave me such a weird idea of sexuality, even to this day, because I made so much stuff up in my head about what my butt meant to her and why she would grab me like that. When I was 13 and really lonely, I started browsing 4chan and got exposed to child porn. I feel like that had an effect on my sexuality because it became some forbidden thing to be aroused by, and it felt cool at the time to connect with other people over something, as fucked up as it sounds. It became some weird, deep, dark secret that I had that made me feel, I don't know, edgy, dark, and twisted, that made me feel cool. 13, right? So that's really normal. People are going to want to feel cool. But as I got older, I buried those feelings deep down out of shame. Of course, I would never want to molest a child or do any damage to anyone. But as I'm doing all this work on myself, these feelings are coming back up. I was at my friend's house and his daughters were running around playing in their bathing suits in the backyard. I looked at one of them and I had the same thought that my mom used to have, look at her cute little butt. And then it feels like this thing has been fetishized in my head to the point that I feel sexual attraction towards it. I know it's fucked up and I feel sick to my stomach typing that out. I'm freaking the fuck out. I feel like such a piece of shit right now and I'm ashamed of myself. I swear I've never touched a young girl inappropriately. I want to lock myself up in a room and never come out over this stuff. I'm in therapy now for other things, but I'm terrified to bring this up to anyone because I don't feel like anyone would ever understand. They'd look at me like I'm a monster. Nobody ever talks about this stuff, but I'm not alone, right? Someone else must be struggling with these things, right? This is a throwaway away because obviously I could never handle something like this getting out. The whole world would think I'm a monster if they knew. What do I do about that? Hide in shame the rest of my life? It's hard enough admitting to people you struggle with depression and anxiety, and hardly anyone ever understands it. But a pedophile? Who the fuck would ever be okay with that? I don't know. This might be a huge mistake posting this, but I need to open up to someone. Maybe doing it online anonymously is going to help me feel better. I just wish I wasn't the only one struggling with this. Can people like me even be helped? Edit, I also want to add that I haven't seen any child porn since I was really young back on 4chan, and I would never search it out. I'm blessed that I have more self-control than that. The worst thing I do now is masturbate to lolly hentai comics, which I feel a ton of shame for. So, I guess it was a little bit insensitive to laugh at the end, but the last part just caught me off guard. So here's what I don't mean to, I understand that if you resonated with the first part of that post, having me laugh at the end probably is going to bring up feelings of shame, but let's try to remember that laughter is something that some people do when they feel uncomfortable. So it is actually more an expression of my discomfort and what's going on in here, as opposed to me judging you in a particular way. So this is a really, really, I think, important post because the truth is that this person is not alone. And the truth is that we don't talk about feelings like this. And so how is someone who struggles with these feelings, what are they supposed to do with them, right? Even this person is in therapy, but this person does not feel comfortable even bringing this up to their therapist. You can't mention it to anyone else, let alone therapists, because what is my therapist going to think, right? Are they going to be able to help me through this? Are they going to be able to tolerate it? Are they going to think I'm a sicko because this person thinks that they're a sicko, right? I feel like such a piece of shit. I want to lock myself up and never come out over this stuff. I'm a terrible person. I feel like a monster. And what goes on here? We can see that this person notices that they have these thoughts, but these thoughts are actually ego dystonic. And what does that mean? That means that they recognize that the thoughts are like not in some way healthy to have. So what I'd like to do today, if it's okay with y'all, is I'd like to actually talk a little bit about what we understand about, from a psychiatric, psychological, neuroscientific perspective, talk a little bit about what we understand about pedophilia. Now, just a kind of big disclaimer here. I'm not advocating for any particular thing, and I hope I'm not platforming pedophiles or things like that. That's really not my intention. My goal in sort of sharing this is that we can see that there are people out there who have certain thoughts or urges that they struggle a lot with, that they feel ashamed of, that can actually be harmful to society, right? So as in society, we sort of have this general rule that children are not allowed to consent, number one, right? Because they're kids and they can't really understand consent. And secondly, that generally speaking, not generally speaking, absolutely speaking, sexual behavior should be done between consenting individuals. And so based on those two axioms, we've sort of concluded as a society that it is not okay to engage with children over sexual acts. So if we sort of adopt that framework, that we still have people who have these feelings. So how can we understand what's going on? And if you're someone who falls into this camp, how can we help you understand yourself and hopefully help you? Because I don't think that these people are like morally devoid. In fact, as we'll get to the evidence, we'll see actually quite the contrary, that a lot of these people are actually like very good people. So there's also like a moral, we get tangled up in terms of like what happens in our mind and the way that people behave. So we're going to go into some statistics over sexual offenders towards minors, as well as like pedophiles. And are those actually the same thing? Because as you guys will see, it's actually not the same thing. So our approach here today, and I'm going to ask, so I'm expecting chat as well in our audience to be as mature as you can possibly be, because I think these people need help. And so we're here to help them. So I know that, there's going to be like lots of stuff that people can be joking about and stuff like that, but that's not really why we're doing this. Okay. Okay. So let's start with this. So here's going to be our approach. So for pedophilia, question number one is, what is it? Okay. And next is, what do we know about it? Okay. Next is, how do we become a pedophile? Okay. And then this is also important. What do we not know about it? This is key. Okay. And then what we're going to look at is neuroscience. So if we think about a human being, at its foundation, a human being is biology. So there's a brain, right? And out of a brain comes a mind. So then we're going to look at the psychology of it. And then out of the psychology is going to come different kinds of like behaviors or experiences. And then the next thing that we're going to kind of do is like somewhere in between here, we're going to like kind of come in here and talk about developmental influences. Right? So we're born with certain neuroscience, and then certain things happen to us and they result in our mind, and then our mind will manifest in particular ways. And then hopefully by understanding all of these different elements, we will then understand what can we do about it. Okay? So this is going to be our approach. So the first question is, what is it? So I'm going to define pedophilia like very simply. There's like DSM criteria and things like that, but generally speaking, this is what I'm talking about. There are some people who have sexual arousal based on being exposed to images or seeing or being exposed to images of prepubescent humans, kids, basically, right? So like it's sexual arousal from prepubescent humans or kids. Okay, that's how I'm defining it. Now, there are going to be there's a lot of problems with that definition, but just for the sake of simplicity, it's basically someone who's like turned on or aroused by kids. Okay. Now, a lot of people may say, so that's it. So next question is, what do we know about it? What do y'all think I'm going to ask you guys a couple questions. How common is it? So what % of the population is sexually aroused by kids? What do y'all think? Okay. Is gender ratio, what's the gender ratio? What do y'all think? Okay. And then a couple of other things. How do we test? Okay, so how do we research pedophiles? And these are all important questions. Okay, and then next question is, what % of pedophiles engage in some kind of behavior? What do y'all think? Okay. So, what percentage of the population? 5%. Studies show between 3 and 9%, depending on the study. So this is a shockingly high number. So just so y'all understand, alcohol addiction is 6%. So there are about as many, so you can think about how many people you know that are alcoholics, and there are about as many pedophiles out there. Okay? So what this also means, so this is 5%. It could be higher. Some studies show as high as 9%. So the other issue here is that, so I want you guys to just think about how many people you saw over the holidays. There's a decent chance that there are, like if you saw 20 people over the holidays, statistically, one of them is likely to be a pedophile. Maybe 2. So right now we've got 4,518 viewers in chat. So 1 out of 20 of those is going to be a pedophile. Right? So that's like kind of shocking. So like even now, just right now, there are a few hundred pedophiles. I don't know if this is ever going to get uploaded to YouTube. May get uploaded. Who knows? But I want you to look at the view count if it ever does, and then divide that number by 20. And that's how many pedophiles have seen that video. Okay? So it could be higher. Now, what's the gender ratio? Higher in men. Okay? Now we get to some problems. Okay, so what are the problems with the research on pedophiles? The first is that it's hard to study pedophiles for a number of reasons. One is that people, generally speaking, are not out there like funding pedophile research, right? There's no you can get all these like charitable foundations, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is not like funding pedophile research. They'll fund research for polio. They'll fund research for this. We've got a lot of research for sex workers. We've got people researching all kinds of stuff. But generally speaking, there's not good research for it. Second problem is that a lot of the research that we do have comes from a specific part of the population, which is not very representative. So what's the easiest way to study a pedophile? You go to jail and recruit people. Right? So this is where a lot of research comes from. So a lot of the research on pedophiles is done in what's it called? Like forensic journals, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to take like these people who are sex offenders. So a sex offender is not the same thing as a pedophile. We'll talk about that in a second. And then we're going to study people, and then we're going to make particular conclusions about pedophiles from sex offenders. But a sex offender and a pedophile is not the same thing, as we'll see in a moment. So for example, there are some studies that show that the frontal lobes of pedophiles are like less developed than the frontal lobes of the average person. So decreased frontal lobe strength. But these are not actually just pedophiles. These are sex offenders. So these are people who wound up in jail. So it sort of makes sense that their frontal lobes are going to be like less developed, right? So if you look at the frontal lobes of people in jail versus the average population, the people in jail are going to have less developed frontal lobes and poorer executive function. That may have nothing to do with pedophilia. In fact, it has to do with more of the fact that you're in jail. More than that. So then people may and this is a huge problem. So then there are some other issues, especially when we talk about, there's like a huge, I think, gender bias when we're looking at the research on pedophilia in men. So I'll give you guys just an example of the gender bias. So does anyone know how we study sexual arousal? How we determine whether someone is a pedophile? So it's kind of interesting because they'll use a technique called penile plethysmography. So what you do is you take like a pressure sensor and you attach it to the penis. And then as the penis becomes erect, you look at how erect it becomes, how quickly it becomes erect. But there's like a huge problem with penile plethysmography as like a measure of how pedophilic you are, which is that like it only works on penises, right? So it's like if you look at the studies, they will start out by recruiting men. And so this is going to be kind of like an interesting thing. So so let's be clear about what this means scientifically. It could mean that it's very possible, and there's actually data to suggest that men are more likely to be pedophiles than women, but there also appears to be like a research bias in the sophistication of studying male pedophiles, right? So we have like really, really good instruments to study a male pedophile, but we don't have nearly as good instruments to study a female pedophile. So I personally, when I see research like this, I think one of two things is possible, or probable actually. Both things are probably actually true. One is that it's very probable or possible that men are more likely to be pedophiles than women, and we have a research bias that amplifies that effect. Because we see this kind of in the media as well, where it's like, you know, when you see it, when you hear a teacher, when you look just like at news headlines of teachers having, like high school teachers having sex with like, you know, their teen, I guess maybe that's not prepubescent, so maybe that's not a pedophile. But generally speaking, I've noticed a difference in the language that's used around like, you know, how people treat men and women. So for example, and I hope I'm not opening a can of worms here, but so for example, like if I'm a dad and I grab my daughter's butt and she's like 8, like all the time, people would probably call me a pedophile. Like people that would rub people the wrong way. But like in this person's case, like they were, you know, their mom was grabbing their ass all the time, and it's like somehow like just kind of socially acceptable. So we don't really know too much. And like this is the big problem with the research that we have on pedophiles, is that it's just not high quality research. Because there is so much shame. People are so likely to, you know, not want to participate in research studies and things like that, right? So I don't want to get into gender dynamics, but like we should state what the research says, which is that it is more common in men, and we should understand the limitations of that research. So we talked a little bit about how do we research pedophiles, and then what percentage of pedophiles engage in some behavior. And it turns out that the answer is about 20%. So 4 out of 5 people. So there was a study that looked at that asked 290 men, you know, have you engaged in anything, whether it's like looking at pornography or some sort of physical contact or whatever. And 80% of people said, no, we haven't. Different studies, depending on treatment and things like that, show like sometimes the you know, people who are like receive some kind of treatment, the recidivism rate is about 4%. So if you like go to treatment, like the likelihood that you'll watch pornography after that or something like that is like very, very low. So generally speaking, I'm getting the sense based on my reading of the literature, and I'm not an expert on the subject by any means, is that pedophiles are much, much more common than people think. And generally speaking, they're far less dangerous than people think. So it's not like, you know, the one-to-one correlation of like pedophile to like a sex offender. In fact, only 40% of sex offenders who have engaged in an inappropriate act with a minor are actually pedophiles. So the majority of sex offenders, and this may sound kind of weird, but the majority of sex offenders who engage in sexual acts don't actually qualify as pedophiles if they are engaging with a minor. So this too, the studies are not fantastic. So maybe that number is higher, maybe that number is lower. And people may be a little bit surprised by that. They're like, wait, doesn't that mean that you are a pedophile? No. So it just means that if you're like a degenerate sex offender, like, you know, your prey can be the whole spectrum, right? That's the way that I kind of interpret that. Hopefully that's not offensive to people. Am I still streaming? Okay. I'm not seeing any. chat, but okay. So what that sort of means is that, like we kind of concluded, that it seems to be a lot more common, and yet there seem to be a bunch of people out there who have pedophilic thoughts that aren't engaging in any sort of unhealthy behavior. Okay? All right. So that's what we know about pedophiles. So next thing that we're going to talk about is, how do we become a pedophile? Like, where does pedophilia come from is another question, right? So let's start with the brain. So some studies show that there are brain differences, fMRI differences, between people who are pedophiles and people who are normal, non-pedophiles. And this is another kind of subtle thing that I want to point out, is that there are some diseases, or not even diseases, there are some situations where we define a person by an attribute, and there are some times where the person owns the attribute, and there's a time where, like, the attribute becomes the person. So I'll give you guys kind of an example. Hopefully I won't get banned for this. So when you say I am gay, right? So I am a lesbian. The subject of the sentence is I, right? And this is an attribute that I apply to me. It's an attribute, right? So a good example of this is, I have cancer, right? I have depression. Now, there are some cases where the object becomes the subject. So a good example of this is a schizophrenic, right? So a schizophrenic is a person who has embodied that pathology. Now we define that personhood based on the disease, right? So like diabetic can be both, right? So then, and we know this, like, this is kind of offensive, right? Because if you like talk about the gays do X, Y, Z, right? And then, like, now what we're doing is we're defining a class of people based on an attribute. So, like, you know, like, and so there are slurs, right? So the F word, when it refers to homosexuality, is a good example of this. So this becomes a slur, where, like, that's the subject of the sentence. Do you guys get that? So this is also interesting about pedophilia. I have a real point here. Right? So the word that is synonymous with bundle of sticks. So that's like an example of, like, when we define a person by a particular attribute, we dehumanize that person. And so even in our language, we don't say that this person has pedophilic thoughts. We identify this person as a pedophile, and that's like who they are. It becomes a part of their identity. And we see that in this post, right? The person feels like a monster. It's like, I'm such a, I am a bad thing. It is my identity to be this bad thing, and it's like, I'm a monster. We don't think that it's just thoughts that you're having, or experiences that you've had, or conditioning that you've had, which we'll get to in a second. So does that make sense? Okay. So in our brain, we know that there are executive function differences. Okay. But we haven't really, I didn't see any studies that sort of suggest that there is there's like a pedophile part of the brain. Like, it doesn't appear that way. So there are executive function differences. And this is what's super interesting, is that not all the executive function differences are negative. So people have done studies on people who have pedophilic thoughts. And what they've actually found is that these people have stronger impulse control. That their frontal lobes are enhanced, which is very different from the sex offender population. Okay? And so if you kind of think about it, like, this makes sense, actually. So you're someone, so put yourselves in the shoes of someone who has pedophilic thoughts. Now, this is going to be a situation where you're having these thoughts all the time, and your mind is going to be, like, suppressing them, right? Like literally, like, that's what this person says, right? So, like, it's like a dark secret made me feel edgy and cool. And then, like, you know, But as I got older, I buried those thoughts. Like, so they're exerting a lot of control over their mind, right? So like their mind is learning how to suppress things, and it's very active. So there's even some evidence that shows that pedophiles or people who have pedophilic thoughts have stronger frontal lobes in terms of directing their attention, which is really interesting. Okay. So the science honestly isn't very good. So at the end of the day, we're not really 100% sure. Okay. Next thing is, let's talk about development. So what is very, very, very common in pedophiles, if you look at studies on pedophiles, one is that they, grew up with like inappropriate sexual conduct. Very common story. Sometimes straight up abuse or molestation. Very common. But a lot of times there's like exactly what this person described, which is like a parent who like does things that are kind of inappropriate. Also, early exposure to arousing material. So what I think is basically going on here is that these people have been conditioned. So like, here's a good, like, so we get sexually conditioned all the time without realizing it. So I'll give you guys just a simple example. So generally speaking, in European countries and in the West, and even East, so most parts of the world actually, the female breast is considered like an arousing thing, right? Like, so boobs are arousing. But if you go to like parts of like, East Africa and South Africa, like the native people there, like women won't wear anything on top. Like they'll just have their breasts exposed, and it's just part of their culture. So like, and this is where, there are different attributes that are like arousing to people. So they're like cultural norms that will determine what you find arousing. So in India, for example, you may found different things arousing than in like South America or North America, or even in Texas, like you may find different things that are culturally like sexually arousing compared to like New York City, right? If you're in Miami, what turns people on may be different than if you're in like Oregon. So the truth is that a lot of what we find sexually arousing is actually like conditioned, and we're sort of taught what's sexually arousing or not. And especially when it comes to kids, like if you kind of like, if you're a kid and even if you know like morally it's not okay, your brain is still learning the stuff, right? It's being conditioned. So it's not like a logical thought process. It's like literally what you're exposed to. So we see this a lot where like basically developmentally, there's a lot of sexual exposure that tends to be quite confusing for a lot of people who have pedophilic thoughts. And that's just conditioning of the mind. It's like, it's just what your mind learns, right? So, and we can even see it like this person actually illustrates it really beautifully, which is when they're, like I looked at one of them and had the same thought that my mom used to have, look at her cute little butt. And so this is where we've talked a lot about self-talk, right? Where do we learn self-talk? We learn it from our parents. We learn to say, like, the thoughts in our head are what we've been taught to say. So when you call someone a noob or a boomer, like, where are we learning that? We've conditioned it. The thoughts that get produced in my mind are the thoughts that I've been exposed to. Okay? So we can see this is like a really good example of that. So developmentally, we tend to see that, maybe the brain is different, but there tends to be a strong developmental influence in the development of pedophilia. So now this kind of manifests psychologically as a number of things, okay? So the first that we kind of mentioned is conditioning. So what does this look like? So now the brain of the person who experiences sexualized thoughts around minors has been conditioned. So their mind is going to produce sexualized thoughts. Now, what we're going to see probably, I'm not 100% sure because there's not great research, and I've done some clinical work with people who are pedophiles, is that generally speaking, greater exposure leads to greater thoughts. And this is not specific to sexual fetishes. This is just true of anything. So if I'm like thinking about Dota, watching Dota, and playing Dota all day, my mind is going to be like Dota, 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 Dota. if I'm like on vacation in Patagonia and I'm like hanging out with people and I'm like looking at mountains and I'm hiking and stuff like that, I'm not going to be thinking about Dota. I'm going to be thinking about mountains and hiking and like, wow, this is so amazing and I should be doing this all the time. I want to move here. So our thoughts are our thoughts are produced in part by the indriyas or the sense organs. Okay? So, so sometimes what we actually see is like straight up trauma as well. So psychologically, like a lot of the things that we see for people with pedophilia are like we see the manifestations of trauma. So we'll see things like shame, right? Believing like I'm bad. Now this is interesting because you may say, but you're a pedophile, so you are bad, right? So like that, there may be a societal conditioning as well because we place a moral judgment. But what I kind of hear in this person's, like, this is common for sexual abuse. Like if this person was not a pedophile and they were sexually abused and they had some other kind of thought, I can guarantee you that feeling like you're a monster, feeling you're broken, feeling you're ashamed of yourself, feeling like what you are on the inside is not worth showing to other people. These are very common like experiences of people who have been traumatized. We've talked about that quite a bit elsewhere, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. But the basic issue is that when you're a child, you don't really have agency. And so paradoxically, like if something happens to you, like you sort of blame yourself because like early on, before we develop a really solid theory of mind, everything around us has to do with us. Like that's just how we think. Because we can't acknowledge that other human beings are out there that are malicious or messed up. Like the only causative agent for a child is themselves until theory of mind develops. Okay? So we see a lot of trauma and shame response. There are a couple of other things that we see psychologically. One is a lack of dominance. So for a lot of people who have pedophilic thoughts, they tend to like have a lot of issues around dominance. So they're very sensitive to being powerless and like really want to avoid being powerless. Okay? And this also kind of follows from trauma, right? And we'll like get to this more detailed in a second. A couple of other things that we notice are that there tends to be a blockage for a healthy sexual activity. What does that mean? That means that for some reason or another, you're not able to engage in healthy sexual activity. So you have difficulty. I'm going to assume for a moment that the pedophile we're talking about is a man, finding a girlfriend. They have a high amount of sexual anxiety. And I think this has kind of a compounding effect. So like, what do I mean by that? So like, let's take two people, okay? Person number one, person number two. So if both of them, let's say, have the same developmental experience of mom grabbing their butt, and then one person is able to engage in a healthy sexual relationship and one person is not able to engage. So what's going to happen is like this person's conditioning is going to start to alter, right? So if I start to have a sexual relationship with a woman, like then what's going to happen is like my brain is going to be like, wow, this feels really great. I'm going to start having sex with the woman. I'm going to start thinking mentally like arousal. I'm going to be aroused by the woman. I may still occasionally have pedophilic thoughts, but I've got like other information that is conditioning my brain towards a particular sexuality. But for the people who are blocked from sexual activity, there is no countering influence, right? So all I'm left with is the pedophilic sexual thoughts. Okay? All right. So then there are a couple of like other things that are, kind of important to understand. So there are like a couple of other drivers. So one that I'm just going to share is like, the mastery of trauma, mastery of traumatic experience. So this is kind of a good example of why the abused become the abusers. So in the unfortunate circumstances, sometimes people who are sexual victims will become perpetrators of sexual violence. And so psychologists have studied this and they've sort of come up with this like idea. I'm not sure how real it is or valid it is. Seems to have some face validity that essentially when you engage in a traumatic experience, your mind develops a play in your mind where like I feel super powerless and the person who is the perpetrator feels very, very powerful, right? Like, so that's what it's like. Like if I'm a 7-year-old and I get sexually abused, like I feel horribly, horribly powerless and the abuser is all powerful. And so what I carry with me is this sense of inferiority, a lack of dominance, and a sense of powerlessness. And so the cool thing in my mind, it's not cool actually, is that in my mind, I have a way to like become powerful again. Like how can I feel powerful? And it's just to reverse the roles, right? So like the way that I can feel, I never want to feel powerless again because like it's terrible when I feel powerless. But the way that I can fix that problem is to start to become the abuser. Because if I'm the abuser, then suddenly in that play, I become the powerful one. And so it's like really, really bizarre. Once again, I don't really know the scientific validity of this theory. Like I don't know that this tends to be like a psychological theory and like, so there's probably some validity to it, but we don't really understand. But like there's definitely this kind of common observation that victims of abuse will sometimes become perpetrators of abuse. And if you sit and you talk to them, what you'll find at the core of that is a sense of inferiority or powerlessness. And so we can also kind of like, when people talk to pedophiles and you ask them, you know, what is actually like attractive about the child? So there may be some amount of conditioning, but then there's also this kind of idea that like, I know that the child is never going to be stronger than me. So what they actually do is like, this is where the lack of dominance comes in, that people sort of feel like in this situation, I will always be in charge. And that's part of what actually attracts them to the situation. Is that kind of messed up? You know, I know people will be kind of judgmental. This just is what it is, right? We're not saying it's wrong in the sense that you should never engage in those kinds of behaviors, but this is what we've discovered about the minds of people who are like this. So then the issue becomes, what do I do about it? So if you have pedophilic thoughts, what should you do? Okay. So the number one thing, don't do drugs. You may be like, Dr. K, what the hell does that have to do with anything? So if we look at the percentage of people who have pedophilic thoughts who do not engage in behaviors, and we look at the percentage of people who pedophilic thoughts who are in jail, what's the difference? One has frontal lobes strong, and one has frontal lobes that are weak. What do drugs do? They move you from here to here. So this is another important thing. Disinhibition is very, very dangerous if you have pedophilic thoughts, right? So this is like the key thing. Now this becomes very, very difficult, especially because you feel like you're a monster on the inside. You feel ashamed of yourself. You feel terrible. And drugs offer you sweet, sweet oblivion and sweet, sweet release. But we want to steer clear of that as best as we can, okay? Because it's going to inhibit your frontal lobes. Second thing, go to therapy. I guess this is sort of a no-brainer, but this is a lot more specific. So the problem is when you say, if you're a pedophile, go to therapy. Like if there's a pedophile out there going to be like, what am I going to do? They're just like, I'm just going to walk in. I'm going to say, I'm a pedophile. Like, and they're going to like fix me. Like, is there a treatment for that? There are actually treatments for people who have sexual fetishes, right? But here's the reason you should go to therapy. So the first is to process trauma. So in the case of this person, you know, it's to like work through all of those feelings of being like inappropriately touched by your mom. And the cool thing is once you process that trauma, I sincerely believe, once again, I don't have a huge sample size. I've worked with maybe like 3 to 5 people who have pedophilic thoughts in my career. So not very many. But that a lot of that like negative energy that the thoughts are born of are these like core experiences. So if you process that trauma, that thought generating machine will become weaker. Okay? Other things to do. So since there are all these issues of inferiority and shame and feeling dirty, this is going to be kind of a weird point to make, but like those feelings, in my experience, create the negative thoughts, right? So when I have depressive thoughts and I feel like I'm a bad person, like the bad person precedes the depressive thoughts. The way that I view myself as a human is going to produce a certain like character of thought. So like if I grow up, thinking that I'm a worthless human being, my mind is going to produce all kinds of thoughts that prove to me that I'm a worthless human being. So oddly enough, like dealing with the inferiority, dealing with the shame, things like that. There are also other things that I've worked on with people who have pedophilic thoughts, which is like power. Right? Working through like the feeling of powerlessness, working through the feeling of like, is it okay to not be powerful? Because if it's okay for you to not be powerful, then you can be vulnerable. And if you can be vulnerable, you can engage in a relationship. Right? So if we like look at these different like therapy tracks, what we're going to see is like outcomes. So then what we're going to do is like this. So let's do it this way. Let's label them, A, B, and C. So if I go to therapy, I can address this and this, right? So like B is going to be like this, and then C is going to be like this, right? And once we do this, then we can actually go over here. We can engage in appropriate sexual behavior, and we can start conditioning ourselves in the other way. There are also some like evidence-based treatments for people who have pedophilic thoughts. So there's things like exposure therapy and things like that. But the point is that there's a lot you can do with therapy. And not only is it like going to help you become, hopefully, have less pedophilic thoughts, but like it'll like actually help these other core things that the pedophilic thoughts come out of, in my opinion. Okay? Yeah, and I think kind of the third thing to sort of do as a result is recondition yourself. And we kind of addressed this already with like healthy sexual relationships, but the truth is that like humans can recondition themselves, right? So as you engage in alternate sexual behaviors, like you can start to enjoy something. So I don't know if this kind of makes sense to y'all, but generally speaking, your sexual preferences are not like set like right at the beginning, right? And I'm not talking about sexuality. I'm not talking about like homosexuality or bisexuality. I'm just talking about like when you have sex, what do you enjoy? So over the course of your, sexual lifespan, you may like certain things at the beginning of your sexual lifespan and start to enjoy different things at the end of your sexual lifespan, right? So our sexual tastes and preferences evolve, much like food preferences. So the first time you have a beer or wine or something like that, it may be like sound like you may not like it. Even the first time you try coffee, it may be disgusting to you because it's like bitter and sour and things like that. You may grow up and really, really love Twinkies. And then as you get older, you're like, I can't eat this crap anymore. It tastes disgusting. So in the same way, like you can actually recondition yourself in terms of your different exposures and stuff like that. So try to, as best as you can, to engage in a healthy sexual relationship. And you may say, okay, that's hard for me because of this stuff, which is like fantastic. So that's why you should go to therapy, right? And the purpose of therapy is not, you're not going to go there and just like cure the pedophilia. What you're going to go there to do is deal with these underlying complexes that may be driving some of the pedophilic thinking or, attraction. Questions? And don't do drugs. Okay, to summarize. So we talked about pedophilia today. The first question is, what is it? Right? And we kind of define it as people who have sexual thoughts about kids. How do we become a pedophile? So what do we know about pedophilia? So we reviewed some of the research, not in a whole bunch of detail, but the truth of the matter is that pedophilia is, first of all, way more common than most people think. So about 5% of the population, somewhere between 3 and 9%, have sexual thoughts about minors and are aroused by that. On top of that, the majority of people who have those thoughts never engage in any kind of behavior or do anything harmful to anyone. It's kind of interesting. The quality of the research in general is very, very low and very poor. Probably does demonstrate a gender bias towards men in terms of like men are more commonly believed to be pedophiles, which may actually be true. And at the same time, it's possible that there are other kinds of biases in our research that make it appear that men are worse than they are. Possible, right? And so the good example of that is like the way we measure pedophilia is through penile plethysmography. So it's like you can't do that measurement on women. So our instruments to detect pedophilia in men are far more sophisticated than they are in women. That's actually like, I'm pretty confident that that's a fair statement to make, which doesn't mean that, so that carries certain implications. When we talk about, how do you become a pedophile, like it seems like some studies show differences in brains between pedophiles and non-pedophiles. The interesting thing is that if you're looking at the sex offender population, that shows deficiencies in executive function, whereas if you're looking in the healthy population that hasn't, if you're looking at the healthy non-sex offender, non-jail population, they may actually have more robust frontal lobes. There appear to be strong correlations with developmental experiences, including sexualizing children. Like, so they grow up in situations where children are sexualized. And so what we sexualize can be conditioned, right? And so they're just sort of taught that this is a sexual thing. And then once you become a pedophile, then there are all kinds of things that could be going on in your mind. So you may be dealing with, as we mentioned, conditioning, trauma, a lack of dominance. There's oftentimes also a blockage of healthy sexual activity. And so can we do stuff about it? Absolutely. In fact, like I mentioned, the recidivism rate is 4% after treatment, which is fantastic, because what that means, recidivism means that the relapse rate, which means that 100% of people go into treatment because they had some kind of issue. So it sort of implies that 96% of people end up doing well after some kind of treatment. That too, the statistics may not be perfect there, and I may be like even misquoting stuff, but generally speaking, it seems that treatment is effective. And so if you're a pedophile out there and you're thinking like, what is treatment going to do for me? And this is why it's important to understand, like, it's going to do like detailed stuff, right? It's not just going in there and they're like, it could be exposure therapy. So it could be things like that. But a lot of times in my experience, or just this is the way that I do therapy, I try to understand like the root of like, where is this coming from? And so the reason that you can't engage in a relationship is because you need to be powerful. And if you need to be powerful, you can't be vulnerable. And this doesn't apply to pedophiles. This is like other people too. So a lot of people who have difficulty engaging in a relationship can't be vulnerable. And the reason they can't be vulnerable is because they used to be vulnerable and it hurt. And so now they like can't let their guard down. They need to be powerful and they can't engage with another human being. And then over time, the good news is that it appears that there's some amount of reconditioning that can be done. And I have worked personally with pedophiles who have had happy, sexually fulfilling lives with adults. So it's possible. So don't lose hope. Questions? Someone's asking about the lolly stuff. I don't really know, to be honest. So like, that's the kind of thing where, I haven't seen any studies and I don't know how similar the I don't know. I just don't know. So it's like, I don't know what hentai or like cartoonized lolly kind of stuff. Like, I just don't know. We don't know what impact, like how much does that overlap with like sexualizing a human? I just don't know. Do people with pedophilia become pedophiles or can they be born as ones? The short answer is we don't know, but probably both, right? So we know that there are some differences in the brain and we see shared developmental experiences. I personally think developmental experiences have a lot to do with it. But the short answer is we don't know. So like generally speaking, or not, we don't know. It seems to be both. So oftentimes when we ask a question about humans, we'll be like, do humans end up this way because of A or B? And the answer is almost always both. Okay, for those of y'all that say that was heavy, so I'd be a little bit curious. Do y'all think that this is aligned with what we do at Healthy Gamer, or do you think we should steer clear of this? If there's mods who can give us a poll. How come so many teachers and fathers turn out to be pedophiles? I think that question may be part of what I was saying about the research. Is that it's very possible that there are a lot of teachers and fathers that are not pedophiles, right? Like, in fact, the majority are not. The other thing is that it's possible that certain behaviors that teachers can engage in if they're women will not be considered pedophilic. We don't know, right? So there's a lot going on there. Now, the most nefarious interpretation of that is that, like, they tend to be predatory, right? So that's like you become a teacher because you, like, want to get access to kids. So in my experience with pedophiles, being a pedophile doesn't make you sociopathic. So, like, in fact, the majority of people that I've worked with are very similar to the poster, where they have these thoughts, but they actually don't want to act on them. We don't know. Oh, wow. Yes, 97%. Okay. When it comes to sexual blockage, would adult content perhaps mitigate this? Very possibly. It's very possible. So is there some way to know if something is conditioned or just part of your personality? Your personality is conditioned. Those two things are not different, right? So I like the Vedic psychology perspective of what personality is. So let's talk about personality for a second, okay? So what is personality? How do you know? So let's start with this. How do you know that your personality is different from someone else's personality? If you say that you have a personality that is similar to someone else's personality, why do you say it's similar? How do you make that determination? So here's what I would define personality as. Personality is the collection of ways that you respond to particular events. So if someone rings my doorbell, there are many ways that people can respond to that. Some people can, like, peek through the thing, you know, the keyhole or the whatever the thing is, the peephole, whatever you look through. Some people can open it up right away, right? So, like, when so there's for a given scenario, multiple human beings will respond to that scenario in different ways. So personality is the way that you respond to a given set of scenarios. So, like, what do I do the first day of class, right? Like, some people go up and introduce themselves to, like, everyone in the class. Those people, we say, have a different personality than people who will, like, try to disappear and sit in the back row. Some people will sit in the front row, right? And some people will prefer the back row. That's a part of their personality, because the people who sit in the front row, every class they go to, they're going to sit in the front row. The back row people are going to sit in the back row, like, all the time, right? So what is personality? It's the way that we respond to a situation. So when we take all of the situations that we get exposed to, and we take the way that we respond to those situations, that's what we call a personality. Then we say there's front row people and there's back row people, right? They're the Hermione Grangers and the Ron Weasleys. And, like, these are, like, personalities are different. So then the next question becomes, how do people learn how to do that, right? What determines whether you're a front rower or a back rower or a mid row gang, right? And that's where experience comes in. So, for example, like, some people may be taught from a young age that sitting in the front row is really important, or their parents may be, like, front rowers, right? So when they're, like, you know, when you go to the PTA meeting or whatever, like, or when you see your parent go to your, like, preschool, like, so my kids' school had, like, a Halloween event, right? And there are different kinds of parents there. Some parents are going up and introducing themselves to all the other parents. Other parents are kind of AFK like I am. And so, like, so my kids are going to learn based on my behavior. So it's partially conditioned. And so if you kind of ask, is there a way to know if this is conditioned or part of your personality? I think the two are somewhat the same. Now, the flip side of that coin is it does seem that some of this stuff is intrinsic, right? So there are clear, genetic correlations to neuroticism, for example. So neuroticism is one of the personality traits. There appear to be genetic correlations to conscientiousness. So how, like, organized are you? How dedicated are you? There do seem to be some genetic correlations. So personality can absolutely be a result of conditioning, but some of it seems to be intrinsic. And at the end of the day, I don't really think it's that important. Because the key thing is understanding what you are, first of all, and then moving in the direction that you want to go. Because the cool thing is, if we're saying that conditioning can result in personality, you can change your personality. I'm someone who I feel like I've changed my personality quite drastically over the course of my life. And that can be intentionally done, right? Like, you can change your default perspective and the default way that you respond to things. So I'm still an introvert, but, like, people don't perceive me as one because I tend to be outgoing and charismatic, right? So I've like focused on like leveling up my charisma. Like when I was about 18, I started that process. So you can invest in it, right? Okay. Okay, so there was one more. Oh, crap. We're at time. There's one more post I wanted to do, but then we're not going to have time for meditation. Can we do that? You guys want, because there's a post about kind of being an introvert, being unmotivated, maybe incelish. Okay. Perfect. If you said perfect in response to that, I suppose my condolences. Okay. There's more that I wanted to do, but I'm running long. All right. All right, so posted by Machine Gun Wizardry. I believe I'm going to be a virgin for life because I'm ugly. Every incel says this, but I think I'm the exception, and it's true. I know how egoistic and pitiful that sentence reads at first glance, but I think it's true. I have a lazy eye and a crooked nose. I was born with it, and without success, have never been able to get past a first date. I'm 26, and every year I lose hope more and more. I know there's things I could do to improve my chances. I'm overweight, 5'11", and 273 pounds, but I can't find the motivation to do it because I don't think it would make a difference. I know Dr. K talks frequently about how incel mindset is a delusion, but most of the people he talks to aren't as ugly as they believe they are. I'm conventionally ugly. I'm deformed, and I don't ever feel any attraction from women I'm around and been friends with. Besides, even if I did magically wake up tomorrow a new man with a new face, I'm so broken from years of rejection and so romantically stunted from years of no success that even if I could, I'd be so behind I wouldn't know what to do or read body language. I'm always just going to be the 26-plus-year-old virgin even if I did get laid. I'm branded. Being so late to the game makes me feel like I'm branded a virgin loser for life. I usually don't think about it, but lately it's been rough. I've been thinking about suicide here and there, and sometimes I feel close to it, but I don't want to live my whole life alone. I'm not looking for advice. I just need to vent because I can't talk to any of my friends, and I don't want them to see how much of a depressed loser I am. I'd rather have been born looking literally like anyone else than this. Thanks for reading, and I hope you all had a lovely New Year. Okay. So let's upvote this. All right. So, sometimes when people feel like they're going to be alone forever, they feel like they're ugly, or they feel like objectively they have like no shot, right? And they can even acknowledge that if I got into shape, if I changed my mindset, like all that stuff, like I understand that technically that improves my chances, but I'm so far beyond help that objectively I'm screwed. And the truth is, like, I know it's going to sound kind of bizarre, but I'm inclined to agree with that person, right? So this is where we have to be kind of careful here for a second. So what some people may say in response to this is you're entitled to your feelings, right? You're entitled to feel that way. Like, it's okay to feel like you're screwed. And I want y'all to think a little bit for a second. If I were to respond to this person and say, you're entitled to your feelings, is that validating or invalidating? What does that actually mean? What do y'all think? If I were to tell this person you're entitled to your feelings, right? What are we actually telling this person? What's the signal that we send to this person if we say you're entitled to your feelings? So it's kind of tricky because for a lot of people, if you say you're entitled to your feelings, what you're sort of telling them is like, it's just all in your head, right? These are just your feelings. It's not real. It's just like all in your head. Like, oh, it's like, oh, you feel hurt? Oh, you're like, it's valid that you feel hurt. Doesn't mean that you are hurt, but you're allowed to feel that way. So there's something really interesting going on, which is that I've noticed that people are starting to use the language of entitlement to feelings as a way to invalidate people's experiences, right? And it's kind of weird. So let's just try to, so we're going to try to, I know it's kind of weird, but I'm sort of inclined to kind of agree with this person. Now, I don't think that they're hopeless, but I agree with a lot of their premises. And if you are someone who feels objectively, like you understand that mindset works for other people, like you understand that like any one of these things can improve your chances, but you still feel hopeless, I don't think you're actually wrong. And at the same time, I don't think things are quite as hopeless. I think the situation is as you describe it, and I do not agree with your conclusion. I'll agree with your premise. Because in a lot of these situations, what people will do is they'll like dispute the premise. Oh, it's like actually not that bad. And we kind of see this in this post as well, where he kind of says, you know, I know Dr. K talks frequently about how the incel mindset is a delusion. So I wouldn't start by saying that this person is delusional, right? I don't think they're actually delusional. I think that their conclusions are incorrect. But like, who am I to say that this person is delusional, right? Like, I don't know what this person looks like. I don't know what this person's experiences have been. So let's just try to understand like what is going on with this person and what we can do about it. So the first thing is this person says that I'm 26. Okay. No sexual experience. Missed the boat. Right? Spawned too late. Late to the party. Things got patched and I wasn't able to get the fat loots from the exploit. Okay. So they lack motivation. Okay. They have a lazy eye. They have a crooked nose. Like, they're pointing out two, like, legitimate physical, what we call deformities, their word, that most people don't have, right? These are things that are like -1 penalty to dating. Like, that's like a pretty, like, legitimate concern. Overweight. Right? We don't really know much about, their professional standing, education, things like that. Maybe they're rich, maybe they're poor. We don't know anything about that. So let's steer clear of that stuff. And then the last thing is that they feel so broken, right? They've been rejected so much that even if they could fix all of these other things, that like this sense of brokenness and the sense of rejection is too hard to fix. Now let's try to understand this person's mindset. So what they're kind of saying is like, I'm screwed. So this results in I'm screwed. And now I'm going to ask y'all, like, let's be a little bit honest here for a second. Like, how screwed is this person? Like, it doesn't look optimistic, right? They've got a lot of stuff going against them. They don't know how to read body language. They have no experience. They've got a crooked nose. They're overweight. They have a lazy eye. They lack the motivation to like help themselves. So it's like natural. Like, I think it's not stupid to arrive at this conclusion. I disagree with it. I think there's a lot that you can do. But let's start by like at least acknowledging that this isn't just your feelings. Like, this person objectively has the deck stacked against them. Like, can we kind of acknowledge that for a moment? So now here's the problem. Is that when you are this screwed, our brain, when it's trying to determine, so like, let's talk about motivation. So like, people are saying, okay, like this person should be, should start working out and start doing this and start doing this, and then you can get better, right? There's a lot of solutions that people will offer. Go to the gym. You can fix that, right? Go to a therapist. You can fix that. Go do coaching if there's no illness. Like, right? So you can like do coaching and understand about yourself and like get motivated and all that kind of crap. Right? There are all these solutions. I would even toss a couple others on there. So there's like surgery you can do for lazy eyes. Depends on what's causing the lazy eye. There's also surgery you can do for crooked noses. Right? It's possible. I'm not necessarily saying you should do it. I'm not recommending it. But there's a lot, there's a lot that you could do. So why is this person lacking motivation if there are so many different things that they can do? Right? So that's a common experience. Sometimes like So let's talk about this for a second. So the more things you can do to improve your life, the more overwhelmed you are, the more solutions you have. So people think that you're hopeless because you lack solutions. But the truth is that the most hopeless people have the most solutions. There's like way too much stuff to do. It's not actually that you're hopeless because you lack solutions. It's because you're hopeless because you're overwhelmed. And then you're like, get into the procrastination mode. You guys get this? The closest thing to this person's psychology is someone who's a chronic procrastinator. Because there's a lot that they can do, but it's just too much to handle. And so they're almost like, I want y'all to think about this as like a procrastination problem as opposed to like a no solutions problem, because there's actually tons of solutions. You can like, read books about dating. You can work on your self-confidence. You can like, focus on yourself. You can become confident. Work on your confidence, right? Like these are all the things that you can do, but why don't you do them? It's because it's too overwhelming. Now let's try to understand what does that mean, overwhelming? Like, how does that work in our brain? So our brain is very good at making calculations, and it's like really good at figuring out what is worth doing and what is not worth doing, right? So like, I'm not going to go outside and like hunt for ducks because my brain knows that my likelihood of being able to hunt for a duck is pretty low. I don't know how to do that, so I'm not going to go engage in that behavior. Our brain is very good at figuring out what we can accomplish and what we can't accomplish. So let's understand what's going on in the brain of this person. So if we say, go get surgery, but what about all these things? Right? Like, this is left undone, this is left undone, this is left undone, this is left undone, and this is left undone. Therefore, surgery is not going to fix my problem. Therefore, I'm not going to do it. Okay, but like, what about going to the gym? Yeah, like, even if I did that, this is not going to get done, this is not going to get done, this is not going to get done, and this is not going to get done. So like, this is going to be insufficient to fix my problem. So I'm not going to do it. I feel broken and rejected. Okay, go to therapy. Okay, sure. Like, if I go to therapy and I feel less broken and rejected, like, I'm still going to have the lazy eye, I'm still going to have the crooked nose, I'm still going to be fat. It's not going to be enough, so I'm not going to do it. Right? Like, and even if I if I get surgery and I lose weight and stuff like that, I'm still going to have no sexual, I'm going to be a 26-year-old virgin. Like, nothing is going to change that. And so the reason we feel overwhelmed is because any step we take is not enough. Right? And I want you guys to think about when you're procrastinating for finals. It's like when you've got so much stuff to do. I know I'm actually personally experiencing this now, where I feel paralyzed because I have so much crap to do. Like, I've noticed this in a way that I haven't noticed in a very long time, where it's like, there's just so much to do. I don't even know where to get started. And when you don't know where to get started, you can't do anything. And if you can't do anything, you stay stuck. Right? And then we procrastinate. Then we go back to our coping mechanism. Okay, so like, this is too much. So what am I going to do? Play games. Woo! Pornography. Woo! Here we go. I'm going to advance the clock. Right? I'm going to advance the clock like in an RPG. I'm going to wait 24 hours, but like, your situation is still the same. So how do you deal with this? Right? And I think the answer is kind of interesting. And it's old stuff that people say. They say things like focus on yourself and focus on your confidence and things like that, which I think is the answer. But it's not, I can't just tell you, just focus on, like, what does that mean practically? Like, what's going to go on in your brain practically if I tell you to focus on yourself? Right? So I'm going to kind of tell you all a story. So when I started residency, I got married my first year, towards the end of my first year of medical school. So when I started residency, so I'm a doctor, I'm working in a hospital. And I kind of noticed something weird. So when I was growing up, like, I didn't get any female attention. In college, I tried to get some female attention and it went horribly. And then even in my middle years, like, I had a girlfriend who was awesome and stuff, and that was great. But like, kind of the couple years before medical school, it wasn't like I was getting, I wasn't like talking to girls, or girls didn't seem that interested in me. And then, I got married. And then during med school, then like, I didn't have to worry about any of that crap anymore. And so I got married, and I had this woman that I loved, and we were happy. And so like, I started, doing things just like for the sake of doing them. Like I wasn't worried about any of that other crap. I wasn't trying to look for a girlfriend. I wasn't flirting. So like if I met a girl like in school, like I didn't care if she was pretty. I didn't care if she was ugly. I didn't care if she was single. I didn't care like about any of that crap. Like I don't care. Like it's just like I'm going to interact with this person based on the circumstances of our interaction. And then something like magical happened. I started becoming like a warm and pleasant human being. And then I go to the hospital, and then there's like a lot of people at the hospital, right? And so I'm like interacting with people, and I tend to be like kind of warm and funny and upbeat and stuff like that. And then like I kind of noticed I started getting like female attention. And I was kind of confused by that because I had never had really female attention before. I still think to this day that, the girlfriend thing and the wife thing was a fluke. Like it was just like a one-off, right? I don't think I guess I did some things good, but. And so then I started to realize like, oh, like, why is this happening? And it's just like, I'm allowing myself to, be my best self. Like I'm just being my best self. And I'm not worried about dating anyone. I'm not worried about getting into anyone's pants. So I'm just like, if I see someone and I like someone's shirt, like I can compliment like a nurse on her shirt. I'll be like, that shirt looks, you don't do that. It's a stupid example because they all wear scrubs. But, you can just compliment someone. You can say, hey, like, looks like you got a haircut. Looks fantastic. You can say that. So you just be a nice human being. And as you start being a nice human being and you get the fuck out of your own head, because that's an important part, right? Like you start attending to other people, like you start to come across as confident. And then I'm also focusing on yourself. So I'm like trying to, exercise and like, I'm just like trying to be a decent human being all on my own. And the funny thing is that by focusing on yourself, by focusing on being a decent human being and not worrying about dating anyone, I was like found a ridiculous amount of like female attention, which I had never experienced before. And then I was confused. And I was like, is this because I'm a doctor? Because the doctor probably has something to do with it. But it's a common myth that just because you become a doctor does not mean that like the opposite sex will start drooling all over you, or the same sex if that's your thing. Sure, it's kind of attractive, but it's not going to fix all this other crap. And so then like the problem here is that you're going to be stuck as long as you're trying to like, get with someone. So if your goal is this, none of these steps will be sufficient. And then your brain will tell you there's no point in trying. Because getting with someone, let's see if that shows up. So getting with someone like is too big of a problem to solve. And since that's the problem you're trying to solve, your motivation is going to completely disappear because nothing you do will be enough. Because I agree with your premise. And so the paradox here is that like this is what keeps you stuck. So this is where also like if you're procrastinating, like you can't fix it all at once. So the only way forward is to stop trying to fix it. And this is where things get a little bit tricky because stop trying to fix it can mean one of two things. It can mean becoming hopeless or it can mean changing your goal. So forget about everything else and just focus on this, right? Like, are you happy with the way that your body is? Like, forget about women, forget about sexual attraction, forget about dating, forget about everything else. Are you internally happy with this? Is this something you are happy with? And if the answer is no, change it, right? Let the outcome be something that is like absolutely much more close to what you can do. Or even like let go of the outcome completely, which I'm not sure that this person can do. But like understand that this is not the goal over here. Like this is the goal. Right? If you have a lazy eye, like there may be medication that you can get, or there may be surgery you can do. Like you may be able to do that. If you have a difficulty with driving, I don't know what part of the world you live in, but like generally speaking, people will do things like you can get those kinds of surgeries and they'll be covered if you've got double vision and you drive, or like there are all kinds of different things. If you're feeling, you're worried about being broken and rejected, like you can go to therapy just because you don't want to feel broken anymore. Like it has nothing to do with women. It has nothing to do with being alone. And this is the biggest problem, that this is how we shoot ourselves in the foot, is we try to set a goal, or we don't try, we end up setting a goal for ourselves that involves so many different variables that we create an unsolvable problem. And when faced with an unsolvable problem, we feel overwhelmed, we procrastinate, we feel no motivation, and then we end up not solving our unsolvable problem, which is not a delusion. Like, this person isn't delusional. Like, they're smart. They're like not an idiot, right? They've like accurately concluded. They've like figured this out. Now, the problem is you can say, but okay, Dr. K, if I start working on myself, is that the way that I end up with someone? I say, yes, that's the way you end up with someone. But the problem is, if that is your target in your mind, literally the equation in your mind will not let you engage in it. It cannot be the outcome that you're chasing. Because if you chase that outcome, nothing will be sufficient. It'll never be sufficient. And so when people say focus on yourself, like, how do you do that? I know it's kind of weird, but what you do is you give up on it, sure. Give up on finding someone. I sure as hell know that I did. And that, when I met my girlfriend, it was bizarre. But giving up on it doesn't mean suicide. Giving up on it means finding a different goal. Just let go of that goal, right? Grieve it. So when you're faced with an unsolvable situation, you've got two options: hopelessness and grief. And what you need to do is grieve it. Say, sucks for me. I will be alone for the rest of my life. So be it. Then the question becomes, what can I do in this life that will give me some shred of happiness? What can I take some pride in? What can I do for myself that'll like do something for me? Like, I don't know, maybe 5 years from now I'm going to commit suicide, but people are going to be able to lift the casket because I ain't going to be overweight when they put me in the ground. Right? Like, I know it's kind of morbid, but I'm serious. Like, there are things that you can take pride in this life. Right? Even if you're single, like, there are things that you can do. You could try to be a better human being for other people. You can feel less broken. You can like be happy with what you see when you look in the mirror. Like, even if you're broken on the inside, you can take pride in what you see when you look in the mirror every day. And that could mean surgery for your nose. It could mean losing weight. Even if you're unhappy with what you see when you look in the mirror, you can be happy with what your body is capable of when you jump into the ocean. That you can swim for a long amount of time. You can feel amazing for climbing to the top of a mountain. There's absolutely all kinds of stuff you can do. And the big paradox here is that as you start doing those things, this becomes more likely. Right? But this is the really tricky thing, is that we're not going to win this game with our mind. Like, we're really not. The mind will win all the time. So if you keep that as your goal, so it's kind of weird, but I'd say, like, very practically, when there are too many things that you have to do to accomplish something, the mind has a lot of difficulty with motivation and is just going to feel overwhelmed and procrastinate. And you're not wrong in believing that things feel very, very far away. And so that's why I would say that, like, you know, I agree with you that it's almost reasonable to be hopeless. And so this is what I'd say is, like, let go of it, right? Let go of hope. Doesn't mean you have to be despair, but you can let go of hope. You can just set that whole thing aside. And you can try to think about, okay, like, is my life defined by this one thing? Because if it is, then I can understand why people feel suicidal. But the truth is, there's more to life than relationships. There just is more to life than relationships, right? If all life was relationships, everyone who is in a relationship would be perfectly happy. But people aren't perfectly happy. We've seen posts today about, you know, people being unhappy at work, people being unfulfilled, people not following their creative pursuits, people being unsatisfied with how, you know, what their MMR is on an online video game. There are all kinds of things in life. And so if relationships are too hard to solve, then let it go and start fixing the other stuff. And when you're ready, a relationship will come. You'll be surprised. Like, literally, it'll come to you. You need to stop chasing it. Because it's that chasing that sort of like makes you come across as like desperate. That is like unattractive to people in the first place. Right? So as you like let go of that stuff and you start focusing on yourself, like as you start like just allowing yourself to be this human that you are, instead of failing to be that which you want to be, people find that attractive. That's the huge paradox. Is that if I try to be something else, by definition, I'm going to be insufficient because I'm not there yet. And that gap that I feel about myself is going to be something that other people pick up on. And as I let go of that thing and I allow myself to be what I am, I embrace who I am. You can still work towards things by all means, but you can start to say to yourself, you know what? I'm tired of being 273 pounds and 5'11". So I'm going to go to the gym. I'm not going to try to pick up chicks. I'm not doing it for them. Because if you're doing it for them and it doesn't work out the first time that you expend effort and it doesn't, where you've lost 10 pounds, there's a cute girl at the gym, you ask her out, she says no, or you don't even ask her out because this person wouldn't even ask her out. They'd talk to her, but then they'd find that, oh, like now she's talking to some guy who's more fit than I am. Suddenly your motivation is the girl and you're not going to work out because you've lost 10 pounds and like, screw it, she's talking to this other guy. So GG, I'm leaving. Your motivation is going to disappear. You are letting your motivation be determined by the outcomes and whims of another human being. Like, that's screwed. Right? So like, why do that? Because I don't want to be alone. Well, with love, too bad you are right now. And so like, learn how to be alone. It's another huge thing. People don't really understand that like a big part of being in a healthy relationship is learning how to be alone. Right? You have to be like comfortable. Like if you want to be in a really healthy relationship, you need to be like comfortable and happy with yourself. Because like a relationship makes things harder, not easier. Like the more grounded you are, the easier things are going to be. Not the harder things are going to be. Anyway, so, you know, if you fall into the category of feeling that any relationship, you're just too far gone in too many dimensions, like I know it sounds kind of weird, but like you may be. And yet that doesn't mean that you have to be hopeless, right? Because at the end of the day, like just because your logical analysis is correct doesn't mean that your conclusion has to be that conclusion. There's another route. And if you feel like unmotivated because there are too many dimensions of your life and you don't know where to start, like that's also like completely normal. I'm not just saying like your feelings are valid, like as if, you know, your analysis is incorrect and your feelings are all coloring your analysis and you're actually an idiot, but you're entitled to your feelings. So, you know, like, no, like I think your feelings are valid and also your like logical analysis is valid, but I don't think it's the complete story. And as you start reframing away from that goal, which makes any effort useless. So if any effort is useless, you are not going to be motivated towards anything. So you have to start making your effort mean something. And how do you make your effort mean something? You let go of that goal. You grieve it. You're going to be alone for the rest of your life. But you know what? This world has more to offer than relationships. And this is where you say, but can I truly be happy without it? I don't know. But neither do you. Because you haven't tried to be happy without a relationship. All you've been caught up in is relationship. So who the fuck knows? So by all means, give up hope on the relationship, but don't give up hope on life. And start working on what you can work on. Let your goals be small. Let your goals be insufficient to accomplish that great monumental task that is too far out of your reach. Just let go of it. Don't try to climb a mountain. Try to climb one step up. Right? Because if you're looking to the top of a mountain, I take one step forward. It's like, literally, it looks exactly the same. Even though technically I'm one step closer, the view is exactly the same. You guys could try this. Go look at a mountain and then take one step towards it and then one step back. Does the view of the mountain change? No, it doesn't change at all. And this is the big scam of the mind, is that the mind is like so focused on the outcome, because that's what you're focused on, it's going to destroy your motivation and keep you stuck where you are. So let go of the goal and start focusing on yourself. Like literally, like that's the advice, right? That's what people say. People don't know how to do that, but this is why you have to focus on yourself. You can't if you focus on that, you're never going to achieve it. But there's something you can do for yourself. There's something you can take pride in. Find out what that thing is and move towards it. And you'll be surprised where you end up. But no guarantees. All right? Who are we rating, chat? So while we're waiting to figure out, okay, we can raid Pokey, that's fine. So while we're figuring out who to raid, Destiny or Pokey? Okay, we can raid Destiny. So while we're waiting for the Destiny raid, I just want to thank y'all for for everything that y'all have done today, especially. I know we covered a couple of topics that were not the easiest to talk about. In general, like, sometimes like we talk about heavy stuff because that's what we're here for. Like, sure, we joke around sometimes and we make memes and things get clipped and stuff like that. I'm sure there's all kinds of crap that could be clipped. But the truth is that, there's some serious problems out there that we as a society want to like shy away from, right? We only like, there are certain acceptable things to talk about, and we just want to talk about those things. But the truth is that a lot of people struggle for things that are like not acceptable. And I believe, and I hope we believe, I think y'all believe this too, because 97% of y'all said that was okay. That's okay to talk about. And for the 3% of you that did not like that, I apologize, and I still want to hear. I mean, if someone has strong objections to it, please let us know. Because it's not just that, just because the majority did it, agreed with it, doesn't mean that the majority is right. Right? So even if you thought what we did is not okay, your criticism helps us move in the right direction. So we really appreciate that, and thank you all for being so mature today, and happy 2022. We'll see y'all on Friday.